Andrew Berry just sat down and answered the questions that the entire Cleveland Browns fan base has been circling for weeks, and I want to give you my honest read on everything he said, because some of it confirms what we've been tracking, some of it adds important nuance, and one specific answer about the four-quarterback room is being discussed in ways that I think fundamentally misrepresent what Berry was actually communicating. Let me walk through it all carefully. Start with the Taylon Green edition, because that's what everyone wants to talk about, and I think the conversation around it has been missing the forest for the trees. Berry's explanation was direct and grounded. He drew the Malik Willis comparison himself, not as a definitive projection, but as a reminder of something real about how quarterback development actually works versus how it gets covered. Willis came out of college to widespread skepticism. 4 starts, and people were ready to declare him finished. He eventually got traded for what Berry described accurately as practically nothing. Sat in Green Bay. Developed. Got his real opportunity and played at a high level, and now he's a starter in Miami. Berry's point is not that Green will follow that exact trajectory. His point is that the pattern of making sweeping career declarations based on tiny sample sizes is one of the most consistent mistakes in NFL evaluation, and he's seen it close enough to know exactly how damaging it is when an organization falls into that trap. 2 of his own young quarterbacks have played fewer than 8 starts combined, and yet certain voices were already ready to write permanent verdicts on both of them. Berry is pushing back against that mentality, and he's right to. What Taylon Green actually is in this roster construction is genuinely not complicated when you see it for what it is. He's not competition for Shedeur Sanders in any meaningful Week 1 sense. He's not a threat to Watson's position in the room. He is a legitimate future insurance policy and a specialized package option, a player with a 43.5-inch vertical, Mountain West Freshman of the Year honors, Mountain West Offensive Player of the Year in his 2nd season, and enough arm talent to operate in a run-pass threat role that gives Monken schematic flexibility beyond what a pure pocket-passing competition produces. The Terrell Pryor comparison that came up in the post-draft analysis is useful here, not because Green's career will mirror Pryor's, but because it illustrates how a physically unique quarterback can contribute to an offense in ways that don't require him to be the starter. Pryor went from college quarterback to 1,000-yard receiver in Cleveland, contributing in wildcat packages as a red zone option in motion-based concepts that used his athleticism differently than conventional receiver positioning would have. Monken is an offensive coordinator by trade and background. He's the kind of coach who looks at a 6.4 quarterback who runs a 4.4 40 and jumps 43.5 inches and doesn't see a developmental project. He sees a puzzle he wants to solve. Green gives him a piece that no one else in that quarterback room provides. Now let me get to what Berry said about Shedeur directly, because this is where the substance of the interview most matters for how we think about where the quarterback situation actually stands. His characterization of Shedeur's offseason was specific and positive in ways that sounded like genuine evaluation rather than the diplomatic non-answers that GM press conferences usually produce. Really nice offseason is one thing. Noting specific improvements in decision-making and pocket management, identifying those as the concrete areas where Shedeur showed observable growth by the end of last season and continuing that development into the spring, that's the kind of specificity that reflects actual coaching staff feedback rather than public relations management. Berry also said his expectation for Shedeur in year 2 is more command of the offense, better ball security, and improved situational awareness. Those are the exact developmental targets that coaching staffs set for quarterbacks. They're genuinely invested in developing, rather than simply managing through a competition. You don't identify those specific growth areas with that level of precision unless you've been watching closely enough to know exactly where the gaps are and exactly what the improvement trajectory looks like. The voluntary minicamp performance adds context to Berry's characterization that makes it feel grounded rather than aspirational. Shedeur's 80% completion rate in 11-on-11 reps on day 1 wasn't just an impressive number. It was a demonstration of the processing speed and decisive triggering that Monken's offensive system specifically rewards. the ability to confirm the post-snap read fast enough to act on it before the window closes. Barry seeing that and noting it as evidence of positive development creates an evaluative chain. The coaching staff designed the practice structure around Shedeur. The practice produced visible improvement in the specific areas the coaching staff identified as priorities, and the front office is registering and crediting that improvement. That chain describes organizational alignment around a player's development, not organizational uncertainty about whether that player is the answer. The Watson question is the one that gets the most political in these conversations, and I want to give Barry's response its honest treatment. He declined to describe Watson as having any inherent competitive advantage despite his experience. He said experience is a strength Watson brings to the room, which is fair and accurate, but that it doesn't in and of itself constitute an advantage in the competition. He said both Watson and Shedeur have worked hard over the past several months, and the organization is pleased with how both have started the offseason program. That framing is careful, and it's deliberately balanced, which is exactly how a GM manages a competition he can't formally resolve until training camp evidence arrives. But the balance of his language about Shedeur, the specific developmental praise, the clear expectations for Year 2 command of the system, the acknowledgement of visible spring improvement, sits differently next to the more general praise of Watson's effort. One of those feels like a coach describing a player he's investing in. The other feels like appropriate professional courtesy toward a veteran in a complicated situation. The distinction is real, even if it's subtle. The collaboration question about how Barry and Monken make decisions together produced the clearest and most operationally significant answer Barry gave in the entire interview. He said it plainly: who plays is Todd Monken's call. Full stop. The GM handles personnel acquisition decisions. The head coach handles lineup decisions. And Barry framed it in a way that removes any ambiguity about the organizational structure around this specific question. If he couldn't trust Monken to make the lineup call, he'd have the wrong person in the job. That statement is doing more than just describing organizational structure. It's removing the question of Barry potentially overriding Monken's quarterback judgment from the table entirely. This decision belongs to the head coach, which means everything Monken has communicated through practice structure, rep distribution, the captain designation, the helmet cameras for processing analysis, the unequal allocation of first-team time, all of it reflects an organizational process that ends with Monken's judgment and stays there. The front office isn't going to be pulling the quarterback in a different direction from where the coaching staff's evaluation points. The Emmanuel McNeil-Warren drop discussion is where Barry offered the most honest analytical transparency of the entire interview. He said he genuinely doesn't have a definitive explanation for why Warren fell as far as he did, but offered a couple of reasonable hypotheses. Scheme specificity. Warren may appeal most to defenses deploying 3 safety systems, which not every team runs, so his appeal was narrower than his raw talent warranted. And the secondary wave phenomenon, when a position group's top players get clustered in draft discussions, the second tier of players at that position sometimes runs later than their evaluation supports, simply because the early discussion absorbed all the attention. Barry compared it to what happened with Jeremiah in 2021, where an undersized but explosive player fell farther than his talent level justified because the scheme-specific concerns narrowed his perceived market. Warren lands in Cleveland as what Barry's safeties coach apparently described as a big old heart player, someone the staff identified with genuine enthusiasm rather than as a compensatory fill. The safeties coach putting a sticky note on Barry's computer about Warren before the draft is a detail that tells you this wasn't a value pick made because a higher priority target was gone. It was a targeted priority that happened to fall further than expected and delivered disproportionate value as a result. The broader picture of what this entire draft class represents for Shedeur Sanders is what I keep returning to, because it's the analytical frame that makes sense of each individual selection. Spencer Fano at 6 addresses the structural failure that produced the worst pressure rate in the league last season. KC Conception brings the layered quick game and vertical threat profile that the receiving core was missing. Denzel Boston adds the 6.4 contested catch presence that changes how defenses have to align on the outside. Austin Barber in round 3 doubles down on the offensive line investment because Barry and Monken clearly understood that one pick couldn't fully address an infrastructure problem that severe. Warren brings the ball-hawking instincts that create turnovers and favorable field position. And Taylon Green gives Monken a specialized tool and a legitimate long-term backup option that doesn't cost the organization a meaningful resource. Every selection traces back to a specific documented need in the environment around the starting quarterback. That's not coincidence. That's an organizational philosophy expressed through premium draft capital. I want to close on something Barry said about development and patience that I think deserves more weight than it's gotten in the post-draft coverage. He said explicitly that the NFL doesn't tend to exercise patience or understand that development is a non-linear process. But that's not how his organization operates internally. He drew a specific contrast between how outside evaluation rushes to judgment on small samples and how the Browns are actually thinking about their young quarterbacks' trajectories. Coming from a GM in the middle of a season where external pressure around the quarterback room has been constant and relentless, that statement is a form of organizational commitment. He's saying clearly that the patience required to develop a quarterback correctly is a value he's operating from, not a talking point he's deploying for consumption. The Malik Willis example is the proof of concept. A player everyone wrote off after 4 starts who eventually played at a high level when given real preparation and opportunity. Barry watched that happen from close enough that the lesson is not abstract for him. He's applying it to his own situation. The AFC North picture that closed the conversation deserves acknowledgement because it's the competitive context that makes everything Cleveland is building either matter or not. Baltimore remains the divisional favorite. Pittsburgh has quarterback questions. Cincinnati has health and defensive concerns. And Cleveland, with a top 5 defense already in place, is adding meaningful offensive infrastructure around a young quarterback who showed real things in limited action under the worst possible conditions. The analysts involved in the post-draft discussion landed on above 500 as a realistic possibility, with the division genuinely open in ways that the preseason conversation hasn't fully reflected yet. That assessment feels right to me when I look at the full picture. The defense doesn't need to be rebuilt. The receiving core has been upgraded with genuinely differentiated profiles. The offensive line has received the most targeted investment in years. And the quarterback at the center of all of it has been in the building all offseason, posting 80% completions in 11-on-11 reps, earning a captain designation before the competition formally closes, and now watching his front office back the organizational belief in him with the most concrete resource available: premium draft picks deployed at the positions that determine whether he develops in a functional environment or a broken one. The AFC North should be paying attention to Cleveland this year. The pieces are coming together in a way that has been a long time coming.